Hello, and welcome to our fourth week of Bible study. We are in Genesis chapter 1, and we ended up in verse 26 of Genesis chapter 1. Genesis 26 says, "And God said, Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. So when we look at verse 26 here, it says, "Then God said, Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish and all the things." Well, that just doesn't sound quite right to me. Man to me is singular, and them is plural. So why didn't he say, let us make men and let them rule over? It seems to me like that would be the way it should be. But he says, let us make man. And so let's look at chapter 5. I think we can find the answer in chapter 5 of Genesis. This is starting at verse 1. "This is the written account of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them, male and female, and blessed them. And when they were created, he called them man." Wow. He called both male and female man. And you know, God has never changed that. God has never distinguished between the male and the female. Adam is the one that called female woman. If you look at chapter 2 of Genesis and verse 23, it says, "The man said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." So it wasn't God that changed her name from man to woman, it was Adam. God made us in his image. Now we have a physical body. The man's, of course, is different than the woman's. The physical body really doesn't mean that much to God. He made us this way so that we could reproduce and populate the earth. But the physical body will deteriorate and go back to the earth. It is the invisible things that are made in the image of God, and that is what God looks at in the man and in the male and in the female. God looks at the invisible parts. He looks at the mind. He looks at the will. He looks at the emotions. He looks at the spirit, and he looks at the soul. Those are the things that are made in the image of God. And so, and in a male and in a female, these things are exactly the same. There is no difference in the likeness of God between a man and a woman. If God had a different name for a female or a man, it might indicate that there was a difference. But he doesn't. They are made exactly the same. So if we look at that and come back to Genesis 1:26 now, and we read it again with that in mind, and then God said, "Let us make man in our image," or we could change that word man to "let us make male and female in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air," and so forth. That makes a lot more sense to me. And then, of course, it goes on in verse 27, "So God created man in his own image." So we're looking at the invisible things of the creation of male and female. I hope it's not confusing. I hope I said that so that it's understandable. I'll be looking at that again when we get into chapter 5, and we'll go a little bit deeper into that. But for now, I hope that explains it. So let's go on to verse 28. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground." So God told basically everybody to be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, and subdue it. So rule over the fish of the sea. God gave dominion to man, or to male and female, both, to Adam and Eve. They had dominion over everything on the earth. Okay, let's go on to verse 30 or 29. 29 and 30. Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food, and to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." So every animal at that time was a vegetarian. There weren't any animals that killed for food at that time. They all ate plants or fruit or nuts, seeds, berries, those things. It wasn't until after the flood of Noah that God said it was okay to kill and eat meat. So then man started eating meat at that time, and animals did the same. At some time in the latter days, according to Revelation, animals again will revert back to eating plants and seeds, nuts and berries and things like that, and will not kill again for food. So let's go to verse 31. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. So everything was very good here. God had produced a paradise for man to live in. Everything was ready now and set for man. Let's go to chapter 2, verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their vast array. By the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the seventh day he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. I've said before that God didn't need rest. God doesn't sleep. God is a spirit. He doesn't have a human body like we do. But God did know that our bodies would need sleep and that our bodies would need rest. We would have to rest. He made night for us to sleep, and he made the seventh day for us to rest and rejuvenate the body. Also, there was another reason, I think, that God rested on the seventh day, and that was because all of creation was finished. There was nothing left to do in the line of creation. God has never added to that creation since the sixth day, and so resting was a sign that he was done creating. There's another story in the Bible about when God rested, and that, of course, was at the time of creation. Salvation. Salvation on the cross, when Jesus Christ went to the cross for salvation of all man. Let's look at Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 10. Get a little. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 12. Well, let's start at verse 11. It's talking about Christ here, the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. And verse 11 says, day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties again and again. He offers the same sacrifices which can never take away sins. But when this priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. So after Jesus Christ had finished the work of salvation, he rested. He sat down at the right hand of God. And the reason he sat down was there was nothing more that you could do for salvation. There are two things that line up. Well, there are several things, and maybe I'll go over those. But two things in particular that line up here in the work of creation and in the work of salvation. In the work of creation, God did all the work. Man did nothing. He didn't even walk into the garden. He was placed in there by God. It was a total gift. He did nothing to earn it. In the work of salvation, the very same thing happens. God did all the work. Jesus Christ did all the work on the cross. Man could not help him one bit. He did everything. He said it was finished, and at the end, there was nothing more that man could do. So God, in Genesis, created a paradise for man to live in. In the work of the salvation, God made a paradise available to anyone who wants it. And so these things are, God gave us a second chance at paradise. And in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve messed it up. They messed up the whole thing, but God gives us a second chance at that. And in the salvation story. Let's look at Ephesians on our way back to Genesis. I said that God, that man did nothing really to deserve either one, paradise in Genesis or paradise through salvation. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works. So it wasn't by works that man earns salvation. It is by faith and believing that Jesus Christ took on all the sins of the world on that cross and died and rose again. Let's go to Romans chapter 3 on the way back to Genesis. Romans chapter 3 and start at verse 20. Therefore, no one will be declared righteous in his sight by observing the law. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of sin. So no one can become righteous through works. It only shows us where we fail. If we go on to verse 21, it says, but now a righteousness from God. If we work for righteousness, that's self-righteousness. And self-righteousness just isn't what God wants. But now there's a righteousness from God, apart from the law, has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. This righteousness from God comes through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference. So, through faith in all who believe. So, on that cross, Jesus Christ took away our sins, and then he gave back to us, to those who have faith and believe, he gave back his righteousness. This righteousness from God comes through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference. Okay, so those two things, those two stories, the story of Genesis and in the creation and the story of the salvation in the New Testament are very much alike. Why did God make man in the first place? To compare these two stories, we need to look at why did God make man. And the general consensus is that God made man because God was full of love, and God wanted to make somebody that he could love, and he also wanted to make somebody that would love him back. Well, to do this, God had to give them a free will. It meant nothing if they didn't have the opportunity not to love him. So he had to give them a free will to either love him or reject him. When I was a little boy, one of my sisters got a doll for Christmas, and you would pull this string on this doll, and it would say, I think 6 or 7 different things. Well, one of the things it said was, I love you. Well, that really didn't mean too much because it didn't have a choice but to say that. And so God gave everybody a free will, and you have a perfect right to reject him or to love him, whichever you decide to do. I'd like to look at the comparison of these two stories for just a minute. In the creation, God created a paradise on earth, and he created a paradise in heaven. He created the heavens and the earth, a paradise in both places. In the story of the creation, God placed the man in paradise. In Genesis, and in the salvation story, he gave man the opportunity to live in paradise. In both cases, God did all the work. He did all the work of creation. He did all the work of salvation. In both cases, he rested after he completed the work, which indicated that the work was completely finished. I think that's a good place to stop for today. So we will start up next week with Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, and we will go from there. Bye for now.